The wind swept low across the Zarna Polana forest, threading through the pine needles like a bow against a cello string. It was late October, the kind of cold that bit deep without warning, and Marek Nowak had already been hiking for hours. His boots left shallow impressions in the leaf-littered mud, the early frost crackling beneath his weight. He wasn't hunting, not in the conventional sense. He was tracking movement. Specifically, the migratory paths of wolves whose patterns had recently shifted in ways the biologists couldn't explain. That's when he saw it. On the edge of a thin stream, where the earth had softened into thick sludge, there was a print. Not just any print. It was deep, unnaturally wide at the forepaw, the claws longer than typical, like curved hooks. Marek crouched slowly, his breath visible as he exhaled. He pulled out a measuring caliper, laid it next to the impression and frowned. It was bigger than any wolf recorded in the region. Nearly the size of a panther's. A fresh print. Still damp. No signs of dragging or limping. This animal moved with strength. He glanced up and for the first time in years, felt the forest watching him. Farther upstream, a splash broke the silence. Marek froze, listening. Not birds. Not deer. Something heavier yet cautious. The rippling stopped. He scanned the opposite bank. Nothing moved. No wind now. Just trees locked in eerie stillness. He followed the tracks with precision, marking every fifth step on his GPS. The forest seemed to stretch unnaturally the farther he climbed, the undergrowth denser, the light dimmer despite the time of day. Then he found it, a patch of ground where the prints overlapped, pacing back and forth, circling. Not a hunting pattern. Something had waited here, watched from here. Above him on a ridge, snow had begun to fall, soft, almost hesitant. Marek looked up and for the briefest moment, thought he saw movement between the tree trunks. A shape, dark and lean, slipping behind the birches like a whisper through mist. His pulse surged. He reached for his binoculars, adjusted the lens, and scanned the ridge. Nothing. Back at base that evening, Marek reviewed the footage from a camera he had placed near the stream 2 weeks earlier. Frame by frame, he watched ordinary footage. Foxes, deer, a lone wildcat, until one frame made his hand twitch. Timestamp. 3:47 a.m. Heavy. A dark blur crossing left to right. Long limbs. Low body posture. The creature's eyes reflected the camera's infrared. Glowing, cold, focused. Unlike deer eyes, these didn't flare in fear. They stared forward, as if aware of being watched. Frame by frame it passed through. The silhouette was unmistakable. It was no average wolf. Its back was arched, tail low, gait smooth like a trained predator, something both built by and beyond nature. Marek zoomed in, enhancing the stills until the pixels smeared. The creature's head turned at the last instant before it left the frame. Not fully turned, just enough to show part of its face. The jawline was elongated, the snout not entirely wolf-like. What unsettled him most was not the physical form. It was the expression. Not wild, not instinctual. It was aware. That night, alone in his field cabin, Marek didn't sleep. He sat by the stove with his notes scattered, the forest's silence pressing against the wooden walls. Outside, wind stirred the branches. Then distant, impossibly distant but real, came a howl. Not long, not high-pitched like a pack. It was low, deliberate. A sound that didn't echo. A sound that warned. The forest looked different under fog. Thicker. Older. As if it had slipped into another century overnight. Marek Nowak returned to the slope the next morning, a gray wall of mist cloaking everything beyond 10 meters. He moved slowly, methodically, GPS in one hand, the other brushing back overhanging branches dripping with melt. The snow had fallen the night before, early for the season, wet and clinging to the bramble, but something felt off. No new tracks. He had expected a trail, a continuation of the oversized paw prints he'd found the day before, but the snow was undisturbed, pristine like untouched canvas. Not even birds had broken it. No fox tracks. No deer. Nothing. As if life had vacated the forest. Only the memory of the howl from the night before remained, echoing in the back of Marek's mind like a pressure he couldn't shake. He reached the stream bed again and inspected the muddy patch where the trail had been. The original prints were still there but already softened, edges blurred by melt. He checked the trail camera. The bark it was strapped to had been clawed, deep gouges fresh. The camera was intact, but when he opened the casing, the SD card slot was empty. Marek's breath came faster. He had checked the camera himself. The card had been secure. Something had removed it, ripped it out. Not chewed. Removed. He turned back downstream to look for signs of passage. Just a few meters away, he spotted an unusual pattern. Branches broken chest-high, leaves torn, and bark stained with what looked like a smear of dark brown. He stepped closer, knelt, and ran a gloved finger along the bark. Dried blood. Still tacky. Several strands of coarse fur clung to the branch. Dark gray, almost black, wiry in texture. Wolf fur usually mats with age, but this was sleek, clean, and slightly oily. He placed it in a specimen vial and sealed it. Marek followed the faint trail, a combination of crushed underbrush, snapped twigs, and occasional blood droplets, into a gully choked with frost-withered ferns. The terrain dipped into a shallow ravine, where a tumble of ancient stones formed a jagged mouth of a cave, low and hidden behind a wall of tangled roots and fallen pine. The cave's opening exhaled a cold breath, not just from temperature but from something deeper, ancient. The air inside smelled of wet fur, soil, and something sharp like iron. He crouched and peered inside. Darkness swallowed the tunnel barely a meter in. No sound. No movement. Only the unsettling instinct that whatever had been there wasn't anymore. Or was watching. Marek didn't enter. Not yet. He backed away, slow and silent, as if instinct warned that any sudden movement would disturb something sacred, or dangerous. His boots pressed softly against the snowy ground. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. From above, a rock dislodged and tumbled down the slope behind him. He spun, rifle raised. Nothing. He waited, heart pounding, seconds dragging. Then silence. As he retreated to the trail, a single disturbing thought clawed its way into his mind. This animal wasn't just avoiding detection. It was manipulating it. Night fell fast in the Carpathians. The forest swallowed light long before the sun dipped behind the ridgeline. Marek Nowak sat crouched in a makeshift blind of camouflaged netting and pine boughs, the damp chill sinking into his bones. He hadn't moved in over 3 hours. His breath fogged the thermal scope mounted to his tranquilizer rifle. Every few minutes, he'd glance down at the motion sensor array on the screen beside him. Nothing yet. But he could feel it. The mountain was holding its breath. Earlier that week, news had reached Marek from shepherds on the southern face of the forest. 3 goats gone one night. A dog the next. Then a full-grown horse. Vanished without a sound. No prints. No remains. Only splintered fence posts and blood-soaked grass. The villagers didn't speak in scientific terms. They had a word, though. One that carried weight in the old dialects. Zmieniak. Changed one. Marek didn't believe in legends. But he believed in patterns. The attacks formed a spiral, narrowing. And at its center was the cave. He returned armed with more than theory. The camera traps were upgraded with thermal sensors. A directional microphone picked up frequencies above human hearing. He planted everything in a 30-meter radius of the cave and retreated to the blind before sunset. At 3:12 a.m., the first sensor chirped, a quiet vibrato in his earpiece. He went still. Then came the second ping. Then the third. Something was moving. The camera blinked to life. Thermal vision filled the screen. A heat signature low to the ground, elongated like a feline but thicker. It approached with deliberate slowness, hugging the forest floor like liquid shadow. The legs were long, too long, moving in a slow, gliding rhythm that didn't match any known predator. Marek's pulse surged. He raised the rifle, heart pounding, breath shallow. He waited. 30 meters. 20. There it was. Emerging from the brambles like it had peeled itself from the darkness. The creature entered the clearing. It wasn't massive, but it was wrong. Everything about its build defied expectations. Its fur was uneven, thick and bristled in patches, sleek and matted in others. The head was broad, the snout narrowed unnaturally toward the tip. Its shoulders rippled under the skin, the muscles twitching in slow waves. It moved with an eerie silence, no crunch of leaves, no snap of twigs. Just a smooth passage through the physical world, like it had practiced not being seen, not being heard. Marek steadied the tranquilizer rifle. Just one shot. He exhaled and squeezed the trigger. Up. The dart hit the creature's right flank. Stop. Didn't flinch. Didn't bolt. It turned its head slowly toward him. Not toward the blind. Toward him. Through it. As if it knew exactly where he sat, motionless behind the mesh. And then it stepped backward. Not like an animal spooked. Not in a scramble. It withdrew in a controlled, purposeful motion, one foot placed behind the other, like a soldier retreating from a line it had decided not to cross. Then it was gone. No growl. No bark. No charge. Just absence. The sensors fell silent. The thermal feed cleared. Only the low wind remained, rustling pine needles like whispers. Marek sat in the dark, stunned. The tranquilizer dose had been enough to bring down a bear. He played back the thermal footage again and again. In the moment the creature turned to look at him, its eyes had flashed white-hot on the feed. Focused, symmetrical, alive with calculation. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. As if it had seen this before. As if it had been hunted once. And learned. The sterile hum of the lab back in Krakow was a world away from the damp, whispering trees of Czarna Polana. Marek Nowak stood by the lab window, staring blankly at the swirling snow outside. On the screen behind him, genetic sequences scrolled like a language he thought he understood. Until now. The fur samples retrieved from the forest didn't just confirm what he had feared. They unraveled it. At first glance, the DNA markers were familiar. Canis lupus, the Eurasian gray wolf. But then came fragments of domestic dog genomes, clustered strangely. Ancestral breeds, some extinct, others tied to 19th-century European livestock guardians. And beneath those, something else. Markers without classification. Sequences that didn't match any known canid. Marek ran the tests again. Then a third time. He even requested blind sequencing from a partner lab in Berlin without sharing the origin. They returned a single line in the report. Partial match to pre-domestication canids. Significant anomaly. Sample may be hybrid or unrecovered lineage. He printed the results and spread them across his desk. Among the charts and cross-referenced annotations, a profile began to take shape, not of a singular animal, but of a lineage. A bloodline that had somehow diverged from both wild and domestic populations. A remnant of nature's brutal experimentation. An apex survivor. Marek dug deeper into local archives. He found old hunter journals, going back to the early 1900s. One written by a Ukrainian trapper spoke of a ghost wolf that did not howl, only. In 1926, 2 children disappeared from a village near the forest's edge. Found days later unharmed, swearing they had been followed by a long dog with silver eyes that never blinked. The account was dismissed as fantasy. But Marek felt the threads weaving together. The wolf was no myth. It was evolution unchecked by man. A line of animals bred not by humans but by the wild itself, refined over generations into something leaner, quieter, crueler and smarter. He returned to Czarna Polana in the thaw of early spring. But the forest greeted him differently now. It wasn't the same watchful quiet. It was absence. No birdsong. No scat. No hoof prints. Even the deer paths were overgrown. Like prey had abandoned the area entirely. He ascended the ridge near the cave again, rifle across his back, breath low in his chest. A storm was pushing in from the east, and the wind curled through the spruce in long, drawn-out moans. He found one of his old motion cams still attached to a tree, oddly undisturbed. The battery was dead, but the memory card was intact. He plugged it into his field laptop, squinting at the washed-out night footage. One sequence stood out. Timestamp: 4:06 a.m. Late February. Snow. A shape passed near the edge of the frame, long and fluid, but behind it, two smaller shadows. Order. Floor. Following. Merrick blinked. Replayed. Uzz. The larger creature turned its head toward the smaller ones. Uzz. Then all three disappeared into the trees. He leaned back slowly in his camp chair, chest tightening. It wasn't just one animal. There was more. The wolf had offspring. This was no lone predator. It was a reintroduction. By mid-April, the snowmelt had exposed more than just the forest floor. It revealed the shape of absence. Marek Nowak returned to Zarna Polana with a different intent. He was no longer tracking the wolf as a specimen to be documented, but as a force to be understood, and perhaps left alone. He had alerted no authorities. He filed no reports. He didn't even tell his colleagues. Something about the footage, the glimpse of the offspring, the deliberate coordination in movement, had cracked the scientific detachment he had always relied on. This wasn't about a rogue animal anymore. This was about nature reclaiming part of itself that had been forgotten, left to sharpen in the dark. That morning, he climbed alone to a peak above the valley, a ledge of cracked shale and scrub pine that overlooked the forest like a crow's perch. The wind was sharp with thawed soil and moss. Below, the timberline pulsed in silence. He crouched there for hours watching. And then it happened. It began with birds lifting from the far ridge. Not in panic but in warning. A slow, wide circling of crows. Marek's eyes narrowed. Across the clearing, movement. First one. Then another. 3 figures emerged from the edge of the tree line. The largest led. Low-shouldered, graceful, and unnaturally fluid. The light caught its fur, dark, with streaks of russet across the back. It didn't skulk or slink. Patrolled. Behind it, 2 smaller figures, less sure on their limbs but growing into the same eerie silence. No sound. No bounding play. Just purpose. Marek brought up his binoculars, heart in his throat. From this distance, details were smudged by distance, but he could see enough. These weren't pups. Not anymore. They were lean and fast. Their gait was low and precise. Learning. He scanned the adult again, its head held high, ears scanning in broad, slow arcs. Then, just for a moment, the creature paused. Turned. Not toward anything. Just upward. Toward him. They were nearly a kilometer apart, separated by air and elevation. But it saw him. Not guessed. Not sensed. There was no aggression. No retreat. Only a recognition. The wind picked up, and pine pollen danced across the slope like fine yellow dust. Marek felt his muscles lock. He didn't raise his camera. He didn't dare move. The creature blinked slowly. Then, with a deliberate turn, it moved back toward the trees. The 2 younger ones followed, sliding into the shadows like fish beneath dark water. Within seconds, the clearing was empty again. The wolf was gone. But Marek understood now. It hadn't come to flee or fight. It had come to show it had survived. He stayed on that ledge long after they had disappeared. When dusk arrived, he descended without collecting footage, without marking GPS coordinates, without retrieving equipment. Some things, he now believed, were meant to remain in the wild. Not as a warning, but as a reminder. Weeks later, a local forest ranger found one of Marek's trail cameras deep in the eastern gully. The casing was cracked. The SD card still inside. Contained only a single clip. A dense forest, early morning light filtering through mist. The shot was slightly tilted, static. And then, the sound of soft steps on dry leaves. Branches swaying almost rhythmically. a long, low form entering the frame from the left, pausing. The head turned toward the camera. Eyes focused. The creature did not snarl nor approach. It looked into the lens, then walked calmly out of view. The clip ended there. No one ever saw it again. At least not on record.